Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on demand care for common ailments such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org. Idaho is a big state and it covers a lot of territory. Idaho Matters wants to take you to every corner of the Gem State by visiting all 44 counties. And we need your help to do that. Email us your story ideas at idahomatters@boisestate.edu for our new series we're calling Idaho 44. And be sure to join us each weekday at noon and 8 on Idaho Matters and travel the state with us.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Samantha Wright, filling in for Gemma Goddard. It's Friday. It's Friday, time for our Reporter Roundtable, when we get you up to date on all the news that made headlines this week. Was this week as tough on everybody as I think it was? Today, our panel includes Drew Dotson, reporter and editor for the Valley Lookout, Kyle Faunensteel, reporter for Idaho Capital Sun, Sarah Cutler with the Idaho Statesman, and Nate Eaton, news director at eastidahonews.com. And we're going to start with you, Drew, because some pretty big news coming out of your area with the Rock Fire, which is really, I think, a whole bunch of fires, or was a whole bunch of fires. What do we know about the Rock Fire, and when and how did they start?
Yeah, Samantha. So the Rock Fire, first of all, you're absolutely right. It was really several fires that were sparked on Tuesday night by a dry lightning storm that kind of blew up West Mountain and across Cascade Reservoir. At this point in the game, as of this morning, we're up to just over 2,300 acres burned.
Wow, that's a lot.
It blew up quick. It didn't take long. These strikes happened shortly before 10 p.m. on Tuesday night, and it didn't take long before you could really, you could see the smoke billowing off the hillside even in the night, and the glow of the fires themselves. And the first 24 hours, it blew up to about 2,000 acres burned. It was quite windy. It was burning in subalpine fir, which, if you don't know, is particularly prone to fire because it's so dry. It has so much. It just really ignites, and then it tends to throw off a lot of sparks. And so when you have wind on top, that kind of lends itself toward rapid fire growth, and that's kind of what firefighters were up against in that first 24 hours. They did respond immediately. That very first night, Tuesday night, firefighters responded and began putting together a strategy and working on it. And then yesterday, winds died down, and they kind of gave firefighters a chance to catch their breath. And I'm happy to report, in the last 24 hours, we've seen about 400 acres of growth. So quite an improvement from that first day.
Well, and I think a lot of people perked up when they heard that this is close to Tamarack Resort. And I read in the Valley Lookout that it even burned a tiny bit of the ski run areas.
That's right. So this actually started about a mile and a half south of the ski resort boundary. For those of you familiar, it's kind of in the Lone Tree area, is approximately where it started. In fact, we mentioned that, the Rock Fire is really several smaller fires that merged, and one of those smaller fires was called the Lone Tree Fire. And so, yeah, that's where it initially started, about a mile and a half south. And since then, as of this morning, we know it is the main fire line, if you will, the northern boundary, is essentially butting right up against the Bliss ski run in Tamarack. If you don't know, that's the resort's southernmost inbounds run. I'm told that their firefighters are working very hard to hold that line, and kind of use it as a containment line. There have been spot fires further into the resort. I mentioned that subalpine fir, and the tendency for them to throw a lot of sparks and high winds, kind of carrying those away and igniting new fires ahead of the main fire line. There was quite a bit of that going on, especially on Tuesday night and Wednesday. And based on there's an app called Watch Duty. If you're interested, you can kind of track live updates on these fires based on dispatch and official news releases, reports, things of that nature. But based on their map, which so far I've found to generally be pretty accurate, it's not 100%, but it's pretty close. They show spot fires clear out to the Tamarack Express chairlift, which is quite a bit further north into the resort. But at this point, yes, the main fire line is right there on that southern ski area boundary for the resort.
And I saw you reported that Tamarack is helping by running the snowmaking guns. And I thought this was amazing. I never would have thought about it, but it's sort of like a giant built in fire sprinkler, sort of.
That- That's it. Yeah, if you were to go to the Tamarack base area right now, um, you would hear a lot of things. One of which would be chainsaws up on the mountain. But you would also hear the drone of the resort's snowmaking guns.
Wow.
I'm not aware of any on the Bliss run that we were just talking about on that southern boundary. I don't believe the resort has any snowmaking out that way. But more centrally located, yes, there's snowmaking guns. All the way up to mid-mountain, I believe, if memory serves. And so what those are doing is, yeah, they're just misting, they're wetting down those ski runs. And ultimately, like we just talked about with the Bliss ski run, is these are potential containment lines. There's a very concerted effort into making this not go further than Bliss, but if it does, these these ski runs that are being wet by the snowmaking guns, that it gives an opportunity to stop the progression of the fire.
Well, I know a lot of concern about snowbanking guns is you can only use them in the winter, but apparently that's not true. They have another they,
That's right.
they have a very useful use in the summer. Who is fighting the rock fire? What kind of support do they have out there?
Well, so this is on the Boise National Forest. They are, I guess you would say the lead agency on this one. It's kind of interesting. I think it also spills a bit over onto the Payette. That the Boise Payette boundary is right there in the neighborhood with Tamarack, and it gets a little confusing. But primarily, this is a Boise forest fire. As of this morning, there are 252 firefighters and support staff working this fire. And that includes the gamut as far as equipment, tanker planes, dozers, hotshot crews, hand crews, kind of it's an all hands on deck type of fire.
So, we talked about the effect to possible effect to the ski runs, but are there homes threatened up there? I think at the beginning of all this, there were, possible evacuations that were brought up.
Absolutely, yeah, that's still on the table. Valley County issues the wildfire evacuations, and they have zones countywide, and there are three zones in the vicinity of this fire that are under what's called the ready stage
Mm.
of evacuation, which really um, is kind of calls for simply monitoring conditions, staying up to date on what's happening with the fire and kind of thinking about evacuation plans. What would it take? What would be the steps that you would need to carry out in order to do that? There's two more stages. There's set and then go. So right now we're still just in that first stage for the three zones, really along West Mountain Road, again in the vicinity of Tamarack. That's where we're talking about with these zones. Um, but as far as I know, at this point, no mandatory evacuations have been issued. I can tell you, yesterday I was out there on West Mountain Road, getting some photos and just observing the scene, if you will, and you looking up at the mountain, and you're looking at this house in a field off West Mountain Road, and you're seeing the smoke come down, and I don't want to speak for anybody else, but if it was my house, I would certainly be worried. I do know that the containment efforts to this point. I don't believe there is a percentage as far as what the containment on the fire is. But I do know that efforts have focused on Tamarack, of course, as we just talked about, as well as that eastern front, which would be the flank protecting those homes along West Mountain Road.
And it's not the only fire, right? I think the reports in the Valley Lookout were that 33 fires have been extinguished this season on the Payette. That seems like a lot, but apparently, is that normal?
That's yeah, I'm told that's about normal. I think, we've kind of had an interesting weather year up here. We had a unbelievably dry spring. I can't remember. I've been living in Valley County for almost 10 years and I can't remember a drier spring than we had this year that had the fire index risk if you that the Forest Service uses at what they said were all-time high levels.
Mm,
So in June, we're staring down the barrel of just catastrophic fire season. And then the
wow.
weather changed in July and really the first part of August too, and it was the wettest I've ever seen it in the summer. We got lots of thunderstorms, but almost every single one of them brought significant rainfall, which, normally we don't see that this time of year. Normally we just get the lightning
Hmm.
like we had on Tuesday night. And so that kind of helped balance things back out. And with those 33 fires that we've had on the Payette Forest this year, most of them have been quite minor, and I think it has everything to do with all the rain that we've been seeing. Most of them have been lightning starts, but most of them have also come along with some amount of rainfall, and so that's helped. While the number of starts is right where the Payette normally sees it, we probably haven't seen, at least based on my experience and my recollection, we probably haven't seen the severity of fires this summer that we typically might. Now, obviously, that's changing with the rock fire. We'll see how this one plays out. But up until this point, up until Tuesday, gosh, we were all just counting our blessings.
Wow. And, well, you mentioned being out there looking at the smoke, looking at the flames, which is pretty scary. There's another big story in your area this weekend that's very big, especially for tourism, and that's the Huckleberry Festival.
That's
Um,
right.
is it going to be a smoky festival? Is that going to detour anyone away?
I things seem to change by the hour, by the day, certainly. Um, to this point, I have been pleasantly surprised with air quality. Now, I'm in downtown Donnelly. I don't want to speak for all of Valley County. I don't know what things look like in Cascade right now.
Hmm.
But my observation is that, most of the smoke is pluming up and kind of blowing off and out of the area and not so much settling. We did see some settling today, I noticed, even up in the McCall area, looking out across Payette Lake, you see a haze up against the mountains. And so I think some of it is starting to settle. But for the size of this fire and how ominous the smoke plume has looked at times, it really has been pretty minor as far as air quality to this point.
And the festival's a pretty big deal, right? You got 3 days of stuff going on, lots of huckleberrying, huckleberry pancakes, a little bit of everything.
Yeah, the Main Street through Donnelly is lined with purple today. The vendors are all setting up shop and everybody's gearing up. I something tells me that the rock fire will not be putting too much of a damper on the Huckleberry Festival.
Oh man, well that's good because it's a great festival and everybody should go. Drew, thanks for the update, and I know you're keeping folks updated at the Valley Lookout, so everybody should keep an eye on that. And thanks for giving us an update today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Samantha. I appreciate it.
Kyle, I'm going to start with you. We've got measles in eastern Idaho and the North Idaho Panhandle. What's going on with this? What's the latest?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Samantha. So these two cases are the first cases of measles Idaho has had since 2023, and they're coming during the country's worst outbreak of the really contagious virus in decades. Both of these two new cases in eastern Idaho and North Idaho are also the first measles cases in the regions for more than 30 years.
Wow. So what do we know about the people who got measles? I understand they were both kids.
Yeah, they were both kids. We don't have specifics on their age, but health officials do say that both of them were unvaccinated for measles. In eastern Idaho, officials say a kid in Bonneville County caught measles after they were isolating in a house with an international visitor who was visiting the area who got measles. But officials there don't believe the public was exposed in East Idaho to measles because the cases there were isolating. And of course, they said they won't be releasing other household cases from that house uh, in public updates, but they'll be reporting that to the state and CDC. But they said they will let us know if there's any cases from community spread where measles is spreading within the community. And then earlier this week, a child in North Idaho in Kootenai County became Idaho's first measles case this year, and that came a week and a half or so after officials found an early sign that measles was in the area. They detected measles in wastewater in Coeur d'Alene.
Wow. So it sounds like we shouldn't be worried, according to what health officials are saying. You reported also in the Sun that it's been a while since we've had measles, especially in these areas. Years.
Yeah. It's worth taking a step back to, I believe it was in the early 2000s that measles was declared eradicated in the United States thanks to vaccines. They're really effective against measles. And right now, health officials are saying, folks, go check your vaccination status. You can contact your primary care provider or access this app called the Docket app, which searches Idaho's vaccine registry system. And again, vaccination is the best way to prevent measles. Excuse me.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, it's a little scary, but I think folks are on top of it from what you're saying. And I know you'll keep reporting on it. Nate, I want to switch to you. You've got the latest in a case involving a North Idaho sheriff's deputy. Give us a little bit of background on this case.
Yeah, this is pretty disturbing, actually. He worked for the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office for over 9 years, and while he was on the job, investigators have found, and he has been found guilty of this, and has been sentenced to federal prison for having and sharing child pornography. And what he was doing was basically pretending to be a woman and communicating with a man in another state and taking images of children, innocent images, and then having them digitally altered and sending them to this man in Alabama. And they were, sexually explicit, pornographic, and disturbing. And the investigators were led to this deputy here in East Idaho because of this man who was arrested in Alabama. He said, "Oh, well, it's this guy in Idaho who's been sending them to me."
Oh my
Or
gosh.
he actually said a woman in Idaho who's been sending them to me. The FBI launched an investigation, and it turns out it was actually this deputy in Rigby.
Wow. Okay. That is disturbing. So the case pretty much wrapped up this week, from what I understand.
Right. Yeah. The deputy was sentenced to serve. He's going to federal prison for 108 months, which is about 9 years, and he will have a lifetime of supervised release. A lot of people are asking about the woman. Who was this woman? Was she involved in it?
Hmm.
She actually wasn't, as far as the investigators could see. He did know the woman and the child, this woman's child, and did obtain those images innocently, but she had nothing to do with this. It turns out she was an innocent victim, and the child was brought in innocently enough, and he was using their images to engage in sexual activities and digitally altering them. And with AI these days, with images online, it's hard to know what's real and what's not. And one thing is, Idaho has passed a law that even if it's AI child sexually exploitative material, that is just the same as if a real child were involved in the crime. So that is one of the things that investigators, the Attorney General, is really trying to go after.
Wow, that is really, really, I don't know, disturbing, as you said. That someone like this, a woman, that just could be innocent in all of this and not even know this is going on.
Yeah, she had no idea. She had no idea. In fact, the investigators went to her originally and thought she might be involved, but quickly learned it was not her. And then to find out on top of all of it, it's a sheriff's deputy, someone who works in law enforcement, enforcing the law, who had been doing this for quite some time. It's, just sad all around.
Yeah, it's scary. Okay, Sarah, a former state senator sued the Idaho Department of Education. Why? What is this case about?
Yeah, so this was former state senator Chris Trakel from Caldwell, and he sued the Department of Education and the public charter school where his kids attend, basically saying that both had violated his family's freedom of religious expression.
And let's get into the details. What did the senator say was the violation? He wanted some money, right? Some reimbursement. What for?
Yeah, exactly. So he, sends his kids to this public charter school, and it's has an interesting setup, I guess, where parents they have some of their own curricula, or parents can select their own curricula, and the school will reimburse them for them. In this case, his family had tried to select a religious curriculum, for example, math problems that have biblical references in them, for example. And the school denied that because it said, we can't spend public money on religious education,
Hmm.
which is part of Idaho's constitution. So his family's perspective was that that denial represented a violation of his family's freedom of religious expression.
Wow, this is a fascinating case, especially when you get into the constitutionality and freedom of religion. So a judge ruled in the case last week. What was the ruling? What came down?
Yeah, so a district judge dismissed the case and basically said, it's true that the government can't discriminate against people for their religious beliefs, of course, but that didn't give parents the right to dictate what curriculum their kid is taught with. And the judge interestingly kind of turned the logic of the case on its head, saying that, basically whatever curricula the school reimbursed parents for effectively becomes the school's own curriculum. And so in that way, a school's curriculum is kind of like the school's speech. So in
Hmm.
this situation with a family trying to dictate what that curriculum should be, it's actually the school's free speech that's in question, not the family's. So the judge basically said this isn't really about the family's freedom of expression at all.
Interesting, interesting. And this senator, he's a former state senator, right? Not people may not know who he is.
That's right. He is a former senator. He served 2022 through 2024, and he was involved with the Idaho Freedom Caucus, I believe, and interestingly was involved in some legislation and in promoting some legislation to try to change some of the laws in the state around whether you can use public funds for religious education. He and other members of the caucus have made the argument that saying that you can't use public funding for religious education is not neutral with respect to religion, but is in fact discriminating against religious people. So this lawsuit was sort of a new avenue, but it's an issue he's brought up before when he was a lawmaker.
Wow. Okay, a lot more to this story. Check it out in the Idaho Statesman. Sarah, thank you a lot. And let's see, where am I? Nate, what's going on at Henry's Lake? Someone wants to build a resort there?
Yes, they do. In fact, it is. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Go for it.
Oh, okay, sorry. This is a proposal that's been talked about for a little bit of time. It actually was two separate proposals in Island Park, where, thousands and thousands of tourists come every summer and winter, and sometimes the lodging options are limited. And so there's a proposal from a company to build a nice resort there with over 100 rooms, an actual conference center that would be part of the resort, and some other buildings. This has been in the works for over a year now, and residents in the area don't want this. At least many of them don't want this. And so there's been public hearings about it. There's been protests about it. There's been people that really have concerns about putting this, and it's on the Henry's Lake Flats, which, if you're familiar with the area, it's a flat area, beautiful view of the mountains and whatnot, and they want to build this resort on there. So last year the proposal got voted down. The county did not approve it, but it is up for discussion again. The company out of Utah, Ensign Hospitality, have come forward, and they say they want to they want to try it again. They want to appeal. So That's where it stands now. It will be interesting if this does come into play, if it does happen, because there isn't a resort like this in eastern Idaho, something this big that would bring in a lot of people. And that, there are concerns on both sides of the aisle as far as what that would do for roads and infrastructure and whatnot. So we will wait to see just if the proposal has changed and how the county commissioners respond to it.
Wow. Okay. And yes, I think there was a public meeting this week, so people
There
actually got a
was.
chance to talk.
Yeah, there was a public meeting just this week, and it was actually held by a group of people who are opposed to it.
Hmm.
Well, I guess it was actually a public meeting for everybody, but a large group of the Henry's Fork Wildlife Alliance, a group that is opposed to it. They had a quite a large showing come out and speak against this. And we're not talking, a small hotel. This is a 132 room hotel. There's 5,000 square feet of meeting space, a
Wow.
spa, a restaurant, a bar, 10 houses, 25 units of employee houses, and things like that. So it's about a 60,000 square foot hotel footprint.
Hmm.
And that's why some are concerned about it, but others want to see this. They want to have something on this side of the state that could bring people and bring in more economic dollars. So for now, there was a public meeting. A lot of people showed up, but no decisions have been made yet. And I imagine there'll be agricultural and environmental studies done before anything does proceed as well.
Wow. Kyle, it seems like a good time following this story to talk more about some of those beautiful spots in our state. And this time, public lands. One of our state senators is proposing an amendment to protect public lands in Idaho. What does the amendment say? We've seen it now. He's unveiled it.
Yeah, so next year, a state senator from Nampa plans to introduce this proposed amendment to the Idaho Constitution to prevent Idaho from selling public lands it could get from the federal government in the future. So Senator Ben Adams is the lawmaker behind this proposal. He's a Republican, and he hopes that Idaho voters could vote on this amendment in the November 2026 election. So we're over a year away from that. I haven't seen the text on it today. Our reporter Clark Corbin was covering that event today, and it's up in the small mountain town of Pine, and he's planning a story on that. But I can get a little bit into what he hopes to do with this and what the goals of this are.
Yeah, and what prompted him to come up with this? He spent some time healing on our public lands. Is that right?
Yeah. So he says he was already working on this proposal after the legislative session ended. That was before this proposal came up in the Big Beautiful Bill that I'm sure a lot of folks have heard about. That would have been a federal land sell-off, and he said that seeing that kind of made him feel like this was even a better time to go forward with this. He's a veteran who served tours overseas and said he spent time back home after tours healing on public lands, and it's worth going back to that federal land sell-off proposal in the Big Beautiful Bill that didn't make it into the final bill that passed. It was pulled after a lot of pushback. It could have had a pretty big impact in Idaho because more than 60% of Idaho's land is public. And as we talked about a few weeks ago, public lands are really important to Idaho voters. About 96% of voters believe they should stay in public land. Public land should stay in public hands, according to this recent poll we talked about.
Wow. And so what do we know? How there's an idea for a trust? How would this work?
Yeah, so this proposal would only apply to new public lands the state could get. So this amendment would create this new public land trust, which would prohibit the sale of new public lands Idaho gets from the federal government. So under this trust, new public lands Idaho gets would be managed to allow for several uses like recreation, timber harvest, and grazing. So but it doesn't affect Idaho's current public land. So we have about 2.5 million acres of state endowment land that not be changed by the amendment. Those are currently managed by separate language in the state's constitution that allows the land to be sold.
And it would be a constitutional amendment, so that has to go through a different process than a law in our legislature, right?
Yeah, so typically a law requires a majority in the House and the Senate to pass, and then it has to avoid the governor's veto. But constitutional amendments are different. It doesn't go to the governor for approval, but to be able to pass the legislature, it has to go both in the state House and the state Senate, and it has to pass with two-thirds support. And then it goes before the voters. It would go on a ballot for voters to vote on. The goal is for this to be in the November 2026 election. And then once it's on the ballot, all it needs is a simple majority of approval from voters to become official.
Wow. Okay. Well, we're going to find out more as we go. Thank you, Kyle. Nate, this has to be the weirdest story. Okay, so you already had the most disturbing story I read today. This has to be the weirdest story I read today. Tell us about this freak accident, very sad accident on Redfish Lake.
Yeah, it is. This was a popular place that many of us go in the summertime. Craig Heap, he's somewhat known in the Pocatello area. He's a surgical technician, and he was out there with friends, relaxing, having a good time. He was sitting on a built-in bench on the dock near the lake when he kind of fell backward, and in it was less than 2 feet of water into the river. So it wasn't like this was a deep part of the river. He hit his head first and basically bruised his spinal cord, fractured 3 vertebrae in his neck, other traumatic injuries. There's some worry that he could have permanent paralysis.
Ooh.
And at least in the beginning, there was some worry of that. But fortunately, he's now been in the hospital. He had to be flown to the hospital. It was that serious. And they're saying that fortunately, he is getting some nerve damage repaired. But it's one of those things that when we go out and we play in the summertime and we're on the river or we're walking along, you never know what type of things could happen. And it's not like this was a dramatic fall that he, fell into 10 feet of water. It was just such a short or small area of water that he fell and hit his head first. So hoping that he recovers okay and is back doing his job as a surgical technician soon.
Yeah, that's just not the kind of thing that you have, when you're out in that kind of environment that you have on your bingo card to happen. Maybe attacked by a bear, but not, falling backward and bumping your head. That is just, like I said, very freaky. You've gotten the story that Craig is pretty well known in the area. Is he
Right.
getting a lot of support?
He is, yeah. They've launched a GoFundMe, and not only he's from Pocatello, but he also spends time in Island Park. So he's a popular bartender at one of the popular bars, the Island Park Shotgun Bar in Island Park. So many people know him, and he helps out a lot with community events and fundraisers. So now the tables are kind of being turned, and his friends in the community are coming together to support him. So they've launched a GoFundMe. Let me click here and see how much has come in. Last I checked, so it's nearly at $20,000 over a
Oh.
few days, which has been good for him. And it looks like he is recovering, still in the hospital, but is recovering. And hopefully he's back at work and there aren't any more falls or bear attacks, as you mentioned.
Exactly, exactly. Nate, I got to tell you, reading these stories has been fascinating. You've got a couple of stories about parking in Idaho Falls, and if there's one thing that can generate buzz and cause ire, it's parking. And what a buzz. The Downtown Association wanted to make some changes. So let's start there. What did they have planned?
It has created a buzz. So, a lot of big cities, you have to pay for parking when you're downtown.
Sure.
Idaho Falls, I don't know if you'd call it a big city, but until now, in all of the history of Idaho Falls, parking has been free. You get 2 hours free. You can park wherever. They do monitor it, the parking attendants, to make sure you're, staying within that 2 hour time limit. But the Downtown Development Corporation came forward with a proposal last month saying that effective August 1, that free parking would go away and you would need to pay for your parking through an app,
Hmm.
and that it would be implemented and that it would affect most of the major streets in downtown Idaho Falls. Well, the Downtown Development Corporation, that money it's a subsidy of the city, and that money would go toward revitalizing downtown. Well, as you said, there was quite a bit of pushback, not only from people who frequent downtown, but from businesses who say they weren't even told about this at all. They were
Hmm.
worried that this would hurt their business. They were worried that people would shop elsewhere because they didn't want to pay for parking. And so there was quite a bit of pushback. There was quite a bit of follow-up meetings. And even, public officials got involved voicing their concerns.
Well, and right? Is it true that the Bonneville County prosecuting attorney was concerned about this?
Yeah, he issued a public letter encouraging this proposal to not happen. His office is downtown, and in this letter, he said, "We have victims of crimes who will come to meet with our team, our staff of attorneys, and we don't want them to have to pay for parking, and we don't have it in our budget to reimburse them for parking.
Hmm.
And so don't pass this. This would create an unnecessary financial burden on those victims." And so when you have a public official coming out, posting a public letter on his Facebook page, distributing it to the media, it definitely got the attention of, the Downtown Development Corporation.
Yeah, and we hear a lot about parking when there are parking changes anywhere. But I don't think parking impacting crime victims was something I had ever heard of before. Um,
Yeah, you
so,
don't, and there was the thing is, in a lot of these cases, when this is implemented, once it's implemented, you really can't pull it back. And that was
mm,
some of the concerns that these business owners had. One lady said, they're if this happens, the customers are gone. They're not going to come back. Then
mm.
downtown's going to look like Armageddon, her words. Absolutely, there'll be plenty of parking because no one will be here. So
Oh.
she said that the problem is solved if you need more parking, but no one's
Oh,
going to go downtown. And
wow.
I think the big issue was that so many of these business owners said this just hit them out of the blue. They didn't realize this was even being talked about. Otherwise, they would have stood up for their customers and said, "This isn't this. We don't want this."
Wow. Okay, so did the downtown group change their minds? Its mind.
Well, there was a couple of meetings, and one they had to move it because so many people showed up,
Okay.
and they moved it to another area, and it ended up that they put the proposal on hold. They said, "We're going to reevaluate this. We're going to see what happens. We're going to look into the case studies." And then a petition was started that reached nearly 2,000 signatures. And then just this
Wow.
week, the Downtown Development Corporation came out and said, "Okay, we're going to move forward with several of our suggestions, except the paid parking with the app. We will not do that. The other suggestions we will implement." And now it seems that a lot of people are okay with that. The fact that they don't have to pay, they don't have to install an app to pay, and that there will hopefully be improvements downtown. And I would imagine that this will be something that's thought of in the future. And kudos to the Downtown Development Corporation for listening to these businesses
Mm.
and the customers. They easily could have said, "Sorry, this is the way it's going to be," but they did actually hold these meetings. They did listen to the prosecutor and others, and they changed their minds, which, it's nice to see and proves a point that if you do stand up and say something, you can affect a change in a city. And sometimes those requests do not fall on deaf ears. Sometimes they are listened to, and then change can happen.
That's right. That's right. Wow. What a story. Okay, you've got another one. It's a garden tour, and I understand it's the first ever in the Rexburg area. Can you tell me about this? We hear these from time to time in different places. I know Boise has several kinds of garden tours. This is the first one for Rexburg, though.
Yeah, and it might even be the first one for East Idaho. I could be wrong on that, but I had not heard of this. I've heard of home tours, I've heard of Christmas light tours, I've heard of other type of tours that you can go around, but this is the first ever Rexburg Garden Tour, and next Saturday it's going to be on display. It's a free event. It's going to feature gardens that showcase everything from flowers to vegetables to herbs to other plants. There's a woman who put this together. Her name's Heather Valentine, and she said that she wants to show it off. So it's an open house style, so you can jump from garden to garden to garden. Visitors can go during specific times if they want. There's going to be 4 gardens to start with, and guests can go there, take pictures. They can see the different ideas. The gardeners, in a lot of cases, will be there so that if people have questions, they can ask them for advice or suggestions. And then, if it turns out that this is a success, then they'll continue it. do have to say I'm not on this tour. Otherwise, it would just be weeds, and everyone knows how to grow those, so you don't need any help with that.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Okay. So I've got about almost 3 minutes left, and I was hoping this would happen today, Nate, because I want to put you on the spot.
Uh-oh.
And Nate doesn't know I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do it. You had a story on eastidahonews.com this week that was part of a series that you guys have been doing for a while now. This time around, it was about what it takes to work at a convenience store gas station. This is your Working It series. This is a fantastic series, and I figured it'd be okay to bring it up because you've actually done some of these. You went out and became a semi-truck driver for a while, and got to drive a semi-truck, which doesn't have a gear shift, which was freaky, I just got to say. Tell us about this series. What is it? And tell us about some of the stories.
Oh, I'm glad you asked. You can put me on the spot for that. This has turned out to be something really fun where each of us, every other week, we do a different job or we rotate through our team and we go and spend a day with someone who does a job. In fact, we had one of our people spend the day with a radio personality just a few weeks ago in this studio. And so this week, one of our guys went to a local convenience store, Good to Go, and he learned, what it takes to stock the fridges, to make the food that we pick up at the convenience store, to wash off the gas pumps. I did go out to learn to drive a semi, and I was surprised at how interesting it was. And I don't want to say easy, but it was more simple than I thought it would be. As you said, there's no gear shift. You just like push a button and you go. And they put me in this little parking test simulator. So we've done all sorts of things. I was a school janitor for a day. I worked in the school lunchroom for a day, and I raced the actual lunch lady on who could make the hamburgers the quickest. She won. She won. And I hope to in the next few weeks learn how to make ice cream. That's one that's on the schedule. So I don't know, what would you choose if you could go do a job for a day?
Right? Isn't that? I mean, and you've got everything. You've got dog groomers, you've got
Right.
librarians, meteorologists. I mean, set aside how cool this is, but if you're a kid or high school or you're trying to figure out what you want to do in life, this is a great way to just sort of go through and look through. Well, that might be interesting, and you can watch it and go, I don't want to be that, or no, that looks like fun.
Right, and it's fascinating how much you learned. For instance, we went to one a couple of months ago about how to print t-shirts. And you might think that you can print a bunch of t-shirt designs just real fast. This one, they were doing it one at a time with the decal on the shirt, and it does take some time. And what does it take to work in a 911 dispatcher? And how are you a funeral director for a day? Stuff that people around us are doing all the time that we might not think uh, takes extra skills or extra work. And we're always looking for ideas too. So if you have any suggestions, send them our way because it's fun to go out and be somebody else for a day.
It's the Workin' It series. It's on eastidahonews.com. Nate, thank you. This is great.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
You too. We've been speaking with Drew Dotson, reporter and editor for the Valley Lookout, Kyle Steele, reporter for the Idaho Capital Sun, Sarah Cutler with the Idaho Statesman, and Nate Eaton, news director with eastidahonews.com. Our thanks to all of our Reporter Roundtable.
I'm Gemma Gaudette, and this is Idaho Matters.